It rained the week they buried their parents. Their father went first, quietly, in his chair by the window with a ball game still murmuring on the radio. Their mother followed 6 days later, as though she had simply declined to stay behind. So Margaret and her brothers stood twice in the same town cemetery at the foot of the hill, under the same dripping awning the funeral home set up each time, and watched the same men lower a box into the same dark seam of New England earth. It was during the second burial that she thought she saw something. At the far edge of the cemetery, set back into the hillside among the oldest slate stones, stood the receiving tomb, a squat granite vault with an iron door gone green with age. It was the place the town had once used to hold its dead through the winter months, back when the ground froze too hard to dig. For a moment, Margaret had the impression that a figure was crouched half behind it, low against the granite, watching the mourners. A pale shape, a face, perhaps, but when she turned her head to look at it directly, it was gone, and so quickly gone that she could not afterward have said whether it had drawn back out of sight or simply never been there at all. A trick of the rain on wet stone, a shadow thrown by the pines. She was burying her mother. The mind does strange things with grief, and she thought no more of it. The house sat alone on the crown of the hill, just outside town, white clapboard gone gray at the seams, and the three of them stayed on through the summer to sort what their parents had left behind. There was a great deal of it. Drawers of letters, cupboards of china, a whole life folded into a small house. The work went slowly in the heat. That July was the hottest anyone could remember, and the rooms held the warmth long after dark, so the windows stood open every night to no relief at all. It was on one of those airless nights that Margaret could not sleep. She sat up against the headboard in the dark of her room, watching the moon climb over the trees, and as she watched, she became aware of two small lights, low among the woods near the cemetery at the bottom of the hill. They were yellow-green, and they moved. She thought, an animal, a fox, a deer at the tree line, but they were too high off the ground for a fox, and they moved with a slowness no animal has, drifting along the dark edge of the woods, pausing, drifting again. Then they left the trees and began, unmistakably, to climb the hill toward the house. For a while she lost them in the dark slope of the lawn and told herself she had imagined the whole thing. Then they appeared again, much closer, and she understood that the lights were eyes, and that the eyes belonged to a man, and yet not quite to a man, for no man she had ever seen moved like that, crouched and deliberate and close to the ground, coming on toward her open window. Her door stood beside that window. To reach it, she would have to pass within his sight. She froze, hoping he would turn aside, and for a moment he did. She slid from the bed and went for the door. Before her hand found it, he was back, and she was staring through the screen and the glass into a face only inches from her own. It was a shrunken face, the skin drawn so tight over the bone that it might have belonged to something dug up, and from within it those eyes shone, wet and pale and fixed on her. Somewhere far at the back of her mind, a small voice said she had seen this before, though she could not think where, and there was no time to think. She tried to scream. Nothing came. He put his fist through the glass. He tore the screen loose and worked the sash up and folded himself over the sill into the room, and she felt the strength in him as he caught her, far more strength than such a wasted body had any right to hold. His fingers twisted into her hair and dragged her head back, and she felt his breath, foul as a sick room, and then the dry press of his mouth and the effort of his teeth at her throat. She screamed at last and fainted. Her brothers heard her through the wall. By the time Paul forced the door and David came behind him sweeping a flashlight, the man was gone, back out through the broken window, and Margaret lay on the floorboards, bleeding from a torn and ragged wound at her neck. While Paul pressed a towel to it, David ran out into the dark and down the hill after a shape already vanishing among the headstones. Near the cemetery wall, he lost it. The county sheriff sent 2 men out in the morning, and they were kind and useless. They walked the lawn, noted the broken window and the trampled grass and the marks at her throat, and told the family what they had already half decided to believe for themselves. Some man had walked off from the state hospital up the county, they said. It happened, now and then. A man, not in his right mind, who from the look of it had got it fixed in his head that he was some kind of vampire and had bitten her in the grip of that delusion. He would turn up. He would be miles away by now. They should try not to worry. When Margaret was well enough to sit up, her brothers wanted to take her into town, or farther, somewhere with neighbors close and good locks on the doors. But Margaret would not go. She said, with a calm that unsettled them more than tears would have, that she was certain he would never come back. They could not move her. So instead, Paul and David took to keeping their father's revolver loaded. One in each of their rooms turned about and said no more about leaving. For a time, nothing happened. The heat broke, the summer turned, the hillside went to rust and gold and then to bare branches, and the work of the house went on, and the wound at Margaret's throat closed to a thin white seam she touched without thinking, the way you worry a tooth. It was deep in the autumn, months later, that she woke to a sound at the window, a soft, patient scratching, like a fingernail drawn slowly down the glass. She opened her eyes, and there was the shrunken face again, pressed close, watching her sleep. He had not gone away after all. He had only been waiting, somewhere near, all that time. But this time her brothers were quick. They came at her first cry, and David fired the revolver through the open window into the dark. They heard the man fall, and heard him cry out, a high and broken and entirely human sound, and then they were both out of the house and down the hill behind him. He was hurt, and they gained on him. They saw him reach the cemetery wall and haul himself over it, dragging one leg, and by the time they were across, he had disappeared somewhere among the old graves, near the receiving tomb. They came back in the morning with the sexton and a sheriff's deputy, because the trail of blood ran straight to the tomb, and the iron door was scored and pried where someone had worked it open and shut, many times over. The sexton broke the rusted seal and swung the door wide, and the smell came out to meet them. Inside was not a tomb so much as a den. The old coffins had been pulled from their slots and broken open and emptied. Bones lay scattered across the floor among the rotted lining, and in one corner a small heap of them, the leavings of whatever he had been able to catch and live on out there in the dark. There was a stub of candle, a rusted can or two, a nest of sacking and old newspaper pressed into the shape of a sleeping body. He had been here the whole time, through the long, bright summer and the turning of the year, while they ate their suppers and boxed up their parents' china a quarter of a mile up the hill. He had been living down here among the dead, going out at night to crouch beneath her window and watch. He was at the back, curled over the one coffin that still stood whole, the bed he had made for himself, and when the daylight reached him, he threw up an arm and hissed at it like something that had forgotten the use of speech. The deputy and the sexton took him under the arms and dragged him out into the cold autumn light, and he was a man. That was the worst of it. Filthy, starved to the bone, no older than Paul, with a man's broken nails and a man's bullet wound in his leg where David's shot had found him. And yet, when he turned his head and the light caught his eyes, they shone yellow-green, the way no living man's eyes are meant to shine. And he looked straight at Margaret and said her name, said it softly, almost tenderly, as though it were something he had been keeping safe. No one had ever told him her name. After that, he would not stop talking. He told them, while they bound his leg and clipped the cuffs on his wrists, that they had no power over him, that he was not what they took him for, that he was becoming something finer and colder and older than any of them, and that the change in him was very nearly finished. He never named the thing that was changing him. He could not, it seemed, or would not. He spoke of it only as something that had always been here, long before the town and the white church and the first of the graves. Something patient down in the ground that the cold ran into at night. It had found him out on the hill, he said, and begun, very quietly, to make him over into its own. It was in the soil, it was in the water, and the old granite of the tomb. It had been waiting a long time, and it was tired of waiting, and the girl on the hill had been singled out the same as he had, marked and made ready, and belonged now to the dark, whether she wished it or not. He laughed while he said all of this. He seemed, more than anything, grateful. They took him away to the state hospital, the big brick place up the county where such men were kept, and there, by every account the family ever had of him, he stayed exactly as he had been. He did not rage and he did not weep. He waited. He told anyone who would listen that walls were nothing to the thing he was becoming, that it was still in him and still working, and that it was reaching for the girl on the hill as surely and as slowly as it had once reached for him. The doctors wrote that he was a man wholly lost to a fixed and unshakable delusion, and very likely that is all he ever was. A sick man who had wanted a thing he could not have and built a whole dark world around the wanting of it. Very likely. But Margaret never could forget the strength in those wasted hands, far past anything a starving man should have owned, or the way his eyes had caught the daylight, or the soft, sure way he had spoken her name when no one had ever given it to him. And once she let herself remember those things, she remembered something else, something she had talked herself out of long before. The pale shape behind the receiving tomb, low against the granite, on the day they buried her mother. He had been there from the very first, before the eyes in the woods, before the broken glass, before his teeth at her throat. He had stood among the graves and chosen her. What she could never decide, in all the years after, was what had chosen him. Her brothers, in time, came to speak of the whole business as a thing safely over and done. Margaret never did. She would say she was certain it was finished, certain he would never trouble them again, certain there had been nothing behind any of it but one broken man and a long stretch of bad luck. She was almost certain. But she left the lamp burning that first night and every night after, and she slept with her face to the window, watching the dark slope of the lawn, watching the black line of the woods at the bottom of the hill, waiting to see whether anything down there would move.